Next up, we will be hearing from entrepreneurs and industry experts on the state of startups in 2018 and how entrepreneurs can overcome barriers to success. I'm pleased to welcome on stage Dolores Wilson, Inclusive Innovation Fellow at Beacon, the DC Women Founders Initiative. Erin Janklow, founder and CEO of Entrada ESL, and Jeff Reed, founding director of the Georgetown Entrepreneurship Initiative and a professor at Georgetown's McDonough School of Business. And finally, Susan Tynan, founder and CEO of Frame Bridge. The Hill's finance reporter, Sylvan Lane, will be leading this conversation. Sylvan, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for coming out. I think we're excited to have a really interesting conversation about the unique challenges that are facing entrepreneurs in a very interesting and vibrant time in the U.S. economy. Obviously, there's been a pretty massive change in the way that the American economy has performed just between 2008 and now. We've gone through a recession, we've gone through a financial crisis, and now the economy is recovering, unemployment is near record lows, but we're still seeing some, lag in the economy in other ways. And obviously, one of the unique and dynamic things about the U.S. economy is its propensity to produce these really exciting startup businesses. All four of you have had your own really interesting experiences in that field. And I kind of want to open it up. I guess we could start over here.
Sure.
What do you see as some of the major changes in the way that entrepreneurs and startups have had to function now in 2018's economy, now that we've kind of removed from the recession, removed from the crisis? What are the biggest obstacles now facing entrepreneurs and startups?
Well, I think there actually aren't that many obstacles today. It's a great environment to be starting a business. One, I think the nature of software is such that you can build a business pretty easily, and you can get started small with limited capital. You can also you can raise capital fairly easily in this environment. I think we'll get to it later. I think there's certainly still sort of closed networks for that, and so I think that's a challenge. I think that's starting to shift, but slowly. So I think that that's sort of the biggest obstacle, I would say, is still sort of the club-ish nature of venture capital, in my perspective.
Yeah, if you think about, like in a very broad sense, where do the most talented people go in our country, and can we get more of them to be entrepreneurs? I think we see one trend is young people that go to great colleges, often, not just great colleges, any schools, they're congregating in certain cities and in certain industries. And I think the more of the brilliant students, even the ones I work with at Georgetown who are really interested in entrepreneurship, they'll go to New York and work for an investment bank. And I think that's a problem overall for our society when you have fewer of these really talented people starting companies, working in growth companies, working as operators, and working instead in industries like banking or consulting that there's nothing specifically wrong about those industries, but they're not necessarily growing the economy in an important way. So I think that's one of the challenges we see. And one of the reasons for that is student loan debt. Right? Our students today are graduating with much higher loan debt than ever before, so they're not able to take risks. And so you have a lot of innovative young talent that's not going into entrepreneurial companies or starting their own in the way maybe they would have in the previous generation.
Interesting. Erin, what do you see as some of the bigger obstacles?
To echo a little bit both of what you said, tactically, it's not as challenging to start a company right now. There's a resource to build your website. There's an incredible network of mentors who want to help and want to give back, and still finding that access to capital so that you can go out and do it on your own, so you can have healthcare, so you can find teammates that can help you grow your business is a very real challenge for young entrepreneurs, for mature entrepreneurs. Access to capital is challenging.
Yeah, and so I think we certainly see an uptick in entrepreneurship across the board. I mean, over the last 20 years, women have created businesses at historically high rates. I think it's about 800 new businesses per day are created by women. About 600 of those 800 are minority owned. However, when you look at, in terms of revenue and sales, we start to see differences in the ability to scale those businesses. And so while we see newer rates of creation, I'd love to see better rates of scale, larger numbers of employer businesses among women-owned businesses especially, and of course echoing those sentiments, closing those barriers to access to capital, especially in terms of the access to social networks needed to ultimately reach investors to fund your businesses.
Now, I'm glad you brought up the idea of networks, and you mentioned the kind of the clubby aspect of it. What do those networks look like, and how would they need to change to make it so a broader array of entrepreneurs and a broader array of aspiring business owners not only have the ability to start up their own businesses, but to scale it and to increase their revenue, increase their sales, increase their presence?
So I think those networks right now, second your point, those networks are often closed. They may be of a certain demographic. They may be predominantly male. So it really requires us to be intentional in how can we identify and promote more women to these executive level positions in investment firms? How can we engage young women to want to pursue careers as investors, as business advisors, especially in the STEM industries? It really starts at a young age to kind of say, these are career options that you should be interested in. Here are the resources to support you. But it really requires both sides of the equation. We need more entrepreneurs to be diverse in their pursuits, and we also need more investors to be more diverse, and not only in their portfolios, but in their own demographics, their own life experiences, so that they can identify with these different experiences of entrepreneurs.
I think there are a lot of great points there. One, venture capital, I think everyone would tell you this is about pattern matching. And so if the CEOs who have taken a company public look a certain way, that bias is going to be in there. Like, I haven't seen someone who looks like me. Well, what does that mean? I think I've been able to raise a lot of venture capital. I've had terrific investors help me grow my business. That has been in part due to my own preparation to be here. So terrific education, 15 years relevant experience. People knew me in leadership capacities and trusted me. That sounds like advice for women. It's not. It's actually showing how unequal the playing field is. I was not in a hoodie dropping out of college getting funded. I had to be sort of this max level preparedness in order to have the access.
So what kind of things can investors or the business community do, people who care about solving some of these issues and broadening the array of people who could actually get in and be successful and, like you said, not have to reach the peak of these different fields? What are some resources that exist for aspiring women and minority aspiring entrepreneurs to be able to break in and kind of be able to get in there at the same level and the same ease?
Yeah, I do think mentorship is helpful. I think angel investor networks can be very helpful with intention. Really.
Mm-hmm. I also think we see the growth of targeted funds. And so, for instance, Backstage Capital or Harlem Capital Ventures, which is specifically interested in investing in women or minority-owned businesses or businesses owned by members of the LGBTQ community. I think when you make that intentional statement and maybe a portion of your portfolio or your entire portfolio to disadvantaged entrepreneurs, that's certainly helpful. But to your point, of course, mentorship, interaction, engaging with communities kind of outside of your own domain to kind of get out of that rhythm of pattern matching. How can we disrupt that a bit? It does require intentional effort and strategies that can be implemented in-house with perhaps, allotting 20 hours per week, to mentor certain groups of entrepreneurs or extending your professional networks. There's a number of smaller scale things that we can incorporate to make sure that engagement is increased.
There's a new pattern that may be really important for this, and that there's research showing that startup and growth companies that have women as part of the leadership team are actually performing better financially. So venture capitalists who invest in diverse teams are actually having better returns. And if we believe that capital will flow to where it's going to make the biggest difference, it's taken a long time for this to happen. But hopefully that'll become the new pattern where people say, I can make more money if I look to invest in diverse teams.
I would say, just from the experience as an entrepreneur, you got to work so hard. Woo. So I think there is also something in backing people who have the hustle in them, maybe than someone who's had a gilded path. I think that makes intuitive sense.
Yeah, and the access to mentorship and that social network is so critical, because we look at entrepreneurs and suddenly you're expert in everything, which includes your personal leadership skills, includes your company, your skill set, the product, and everything else. So having access to mentors and having the ability to meet people where you can have those organic conversations and meet connectors and meet other people who share your desire for social change or your reason that you're starting the company. it's easier to find those when you have access to networking events, when you have access to incubator programs, when you have facilitated events that are specifically to say, these are people that need help, and these are people who have incredible resources, come together and share.
Interesting. Now, obviously, we've seen a lot of innovation, a lot of disruption in a lot of different fields over the past few years. It almost seems like it's on an exponential curve, how every industry, it seems, there's a new startup just fundamentally shifting the way that, services or products that have been pretty much the same for hundreds of years, if not just a few decades, have performed and have been offered to the American public. What types of businesses are drawing the most attention from investors? What I'm trying to get at is, what are the types of businesses that investors are clamoring over to put their money into? Jeff, do you want to start?
You see the Silicon Valley model of entrepreneurship still exists, right? That's the high tech. There's a lot of mythology around it, that's all 22-year-olds dropping out of college wearing hoodies, and there is a high tech culture there where companies those are still getting funded. But what you do see now is a bigger, more diversity, both geographic diversity. Investors are looking beyond California. They're also looking at different audiences and different demographics and different industries. Here in DC, we have this real resurgence in food tech, which is great. And you have so many industries that are full of problems and issues that need disruption, and you have people solving them. So whether it's education or healthcare or food or whatever it might be, there are a lot more industries that are attracting capital.
A really exciting trend that I see is really the push toward more social entrepreneurship. So Entrada enables low-income immigrants to learn English while they're working. It's an employer-sponsored program, so it provides value both to the learners as well as to their employers. So my take on this is admittedly skewed because my whole network is full of other people who are trying to solve and tackle really challenging social issues through a business lens. And that's an incredibly exciting place to be. And I think that's a newer trend that started really just in the past few years, is the ability to acknowledge that if you're solving a huge social problem, there is huge potential to scale because there are millions of people affected by these issues, and you're starting to have more conversations with investors who understand that, and more conversations with angels who also want to give back and feel that level of contribution. And I think that's a really exciting trend starting now that will continue to the future.
And to second those points, I think it's been really great to see so many investors make an intentional outreach in lower income and also rural communities, such as Revolution's Rise of the Rest bus tour, which travels intentionally outside of the three major hubs of venture capital investment, and is really finding exciting companies, inspiring entrepreneurs that are just not in these larger markets, but deserve that funding and deserve to be scaled. So I'm really excited to see folks making a real intentional effort to reach these people where they are.
Right. Now, one of the major initiatives in Washington over the past couple of years has been focused on being able to help startups, entrepreneurs get off the ground running and really grow and expand at a good pace. It was, one of the main pitches of the tax cut bill that passed last year. It's been a prevailing interest of the administration, but it's also, one of the few things that in DC you could find some sort of common ground between Democrats and Republicans on. Everybody wants to help small businesses and entrepreneurs in some capacity. There's just disagreements over the right ways to do that. What are some of the ways that, or rather, what are some of the misconceptions, I guess? What is seen as helping entrepreneurs that doesn't actually help that much, and what are entrepreneurs focused on when it comes to the kinds of challenges that are facing them in terms of growing?
So I'll start. I run a high-growth business, a venture-backed business. And so we took money in order to create a very large business. And so in doing so, that means the first couple of years, we are not profitable. That is intentional. But that also means that a tax bill isn't even something that's on our radar. It doesn't help us employ more people. It doesn't help us think about the world. There was a little bit of, would it help us ensure there were more exits because there would be more companies to buy us one day? Maybe. It really, in no way impacted sort of us and how we pursued our goals.
Has the tax bill or anything else affected the way you run your startup?
Not yet, though. I would say there's a lot that government does and tries to do, and it's hard to know where to look to find what resources are available that may be directly applicable to me or my friends. So often there is this kind of hidden list, but unless you happen to hear about it from these very important networking events or a very fabulous mentor who knows, it's hard to find out where to look. And then you're doing so much concurrently because you're building an entire business and running a team, and kind of taking that time to sift through what could maybe be available is challenging.
Yeah, I think for the majority of early stage entrepreneurs, their first goal of the day is not to talk to my accountant if I've hired one and figure out, how can I best navigate this new tax bill. It's just not a priority. But also, a number of the tax breaks are applicable to much larger companies. And if we're looking at, especially here in DC, the majority of women-owned businesses are sole proprietorships, which are really just not benefiting necessarily from a lot of the portions of this particular bill. Is it really helping us right now? Is it helping the industries that women-owned businesses predominate within? These are kind of questions that I think policymakers should consider, and perhaps being removed from kind of that day-to-day environment of owning a business and operating a business can sometimes detract from that expertise, which I think I would love to encourage more engagement between entrepreneurs and policymakers for that reason.
What you see here is a huge difference between small business and entrepreneurs when it comes to how policy affects, right? The small businesses are great. They create a lot of jobs, do a lot of great things for our economy, but it's a different set of policies and challenges and priorities than you have from early stage entrepreneurs. And our policymakers, another big divide we have is between policymakers and entrepreneurs. They just have different cultures, different mindsets, and a lot of policymakers just don't understand entrepreneurs. They think of them as those crazy people in Silicon Valley, and the risk aversion that politics forces people into. And there's just a lot of reasons why politicians have a hard time understanding and therefore supporting entrepreneurs. One of the reasons I hope our entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Washington continues to grow is it'll help the Washington policymakers know entrepreneurs. They're in their own community in the local economy here, and it's not just those crazy people in California, as the assumption might be.
Well, that's a really interesting point, and now we're gonna open it up to the audience for questions. If anybody has questions, I think there's microphones going around.
Good morning. My name's Rajan. I'm an artist in D.C. I had a question for Susan. President Trump displays the advantages of being a powerful heterosexual man. What are the advantages of being a powerful heterosexual woman and rich, powerful woman?
Wow, that is interesting. Yeah, I guess I certainly think the question was, President Trump displays his advantages of being a rich, powerful heterosexual male. How do I use advantages of being a female? I think probably I use one as a leader. Decency is important to me. And so I think fairness is important in our org. I think people are attracted and loyal to me for those reasons. I'm honest and forthcoming and transparent and reliable, and so I don't know if those things are gender related, but I do use them in my leadership style. I do think we have evidence now, right, that very different leadership styles can be effective. I've certainly realized through my path that I can't really change mine like I am who I am. I certainly think in the process of raising venture capital, dollars are finite, and I'm going up against people who may be more like your question, who maybe are fronting a little bit more, maybe embellishing their facts a little bit more. And so that's a challenge, because I'm coming to you with my real plan and I'm going up against someone different. But I've always said, if you're investing in my business, you're investing in all of that of me, and so that trust is part of the package.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Sorry, up here. Sorry,
Good morning. My name is Kelly Hebron. I'm from Prison to Paralegal. And my question is, and before I get started, I listened to your podcast on how I built this on NPR, and it was a very interesting podcast. And my question, I heard recently about the implosion of tech as it relates to the stock market and the impact it's having on the economy, mainly in San Francisco. So my question to you, particularly as a new startup and a founder, what do you see as the direction of venture capital funding, particularly as it relates to East Coast, particularly as it relates to social enterprises, and most particularly as it relates to women, minorities, small, and any of the box you can check?
Well, that's a big one.
Yeah.
I'll throw out one thing that I've seen, in that there's a merging of this concept of social entrepreneurship or social enterprise. There are very few businesses today that survive or that get started without some kind of social impact as part of it. I know the young people I work with, they don't see the difference. They think every brand they want to associate with, any company they want to start, there's a social mission at its heart. So that, at least to part of your question, I see that maybe it's a millennial values thing, but any company that doesn't articulate their values is going to have a harder time getting customers. And that doesn't mean they don't have to be profitable to be successful, but there's not a sense that you have to be one or the other. You can be have a social impact and be very profitable. So that we see a lot of shifting going on in that sense.
The trend is certainly moving toward becoming more inclusive, but as you mentioned, it's a very slow trend. That said, only 3% of venture capital went to female-founded businesses last year. So the fact that we're talking about it and that there are stats around that and that we're having this conversation is helpful. It's still a very long road ahead. When you ask what the future looks like, I obviously would hope that it's inclusive and more representative of what the country looks like as a whole.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I wish we could keep it going all day, but that's unfortunately all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks everybody for listening in.
Thank you.